Hi, this is Robert Burris here again. I think this is going to be my last video focused on the emergent church, which is the manifestation of Protestant evangelical postmodernism. Postmodernism being a irrational philosophy proposing to rid us of um, knowledge. Certainly, knowledge in the biblical context of communicating knowledge through language. Um, I just want to nail down a few things in this last video on the emergent church. Still using Tony Jones' book, The New Christians, and intending in that to use Tony's own words, spokesman of the emergent church, at least for a number of years, to establish a case against it, against the emergent church, and against postmodernism, particularly in a Christian context. In the last video, one of the reasons I want to put this study of this book to an end is that it really just aggravates me. Being a student of the Bible and learning through the grace of God to trust in the Bible, to put it to the test and believe, and find in Christ a logos that I find fruitful for life. This being antithetical to the Bible and what it promotes just aggravates me. Really rubs me raw, basically. It's chaff that chafes, to mix some metaphors. Well, so that the last chapter I was in was rather the first chapter, and pointed out some of the one or two theological blunders that Tony makes in the language he uses, the metaphors he chooses. And I'm in this, still in this first chapter. I guess that was actually the introduction. That was part of the front matter. But I'm still in this chapter, and I just wanted to pick up a little bit here. He proposes to convince us that in discussing his version of the historical epistemological epistemology being the theory of knowledge, what knowledge is, how one acquires knowledge, and how knowledge contrasts with belief. And so I guess I'll just pick up here. Is there something in the air? This is page 2. Is there something in the air? Is there a spiritual itch that people are trying to scratch, but it's just in the middle of their back in a place they can't quite reach? His reference to an itch and knowing more about the emergent church reminds me of what is said in the epistles about itching ears. I believe that's in Thessalonians. Perhaps I'm wrong. Perhaps it's actually in John's epistles, but itching ears, which is a sign of apostasy, which is the mentality of being apostate. Always wanted to hear something new. Tony's book is Emergence is all supposedly about something new, although it's all really about stuff that's very old. So is there something in the air? Is there a spiritual itch? And again, the air, the Antichrist or Satan being presented in the epistles as being the prince of the air. You know, he just picks the worst metaphors, in my opinion. It seems incontrovertibly so that there's this itch in the air that people can't quite scratch. We are not becoming less religious, as some people argue. We're becoming differently religious. And the shift is significant. Referring obliquely, not overtly here, but to paradigm shift. New Age idea that enough people get to thinking a certain way. The power of the collective mind will bring about change in the world. And the shift is significant. Some call it a tectonic shift, others seismic or tsunamic. You know, he's got to mix some, geology and what have you in here. You got to maintain this organic flavor to appeal to the scientists. Whatever your geologic metaphor, the changes are shaking the earth beneath our feet. Reminds me of a comment Francis Schaeffer made about that the abandonment of biblical inerrancy and the church is charged to proclaim it, proclaim the gospel. Paul's words exhorting us to preach in the context of faith coming by hearing and hearing by the word. So this is in contrast to it. He says, as the second half of the 20th century began, most sociologists, social theorists, and social philosophers were proclaiming that the death of religion was nigh. They were bards of an impending secularism that was lapping, into the shores of all Western countries. We are losing our religion, they calmly and oftenly approvingly lectured from behind their podia. We're leaving the myths of this God and that God behind and establishing a new spirituality. I highlighted several years back when I was engaged in a critique of this book. I highlighted these things: this God, that God, and new spirituality. And this is unhinged from the oppressive regimes of conventional religion. Tony's he's not Christian. Sorry. He's not wanting to advance Christianity or biblical faith. He wants to give you a new religion. This is all about new religion, new spirituality that is unhinged from the oppressive regimes of conventional religion. Every person in this book that he uses as an example of someone who's adopted this new spirituality was someone who was had a crisis in their faith within Protestantism. Either, by the way he describes them, either they never believed and were functionaries in the church in some capacity, but yet they reached the point where they could no longer function in the church that they were in or the missionary organization they were in. And Tony also tells a story of him being one of those people. So this is, no matter how you slice it, it's a breakdown of Protestant Orthodox Christianity. that he's telling a story about here. Let's just face up to the facts. And it's a breakdown within the church. This is not church being attacked from outside. This is breakdown from within. I would assert that it's basically the failure of false conversions. It's the false conversions bearing the fruit that one would expect from false converts. Unhinged from the oppressive regimes of conventional religion, New Ageism is a nod in this direction. I don't know if it's conscious or what, but he is tying New Age theosophy, slash theosophy, which is, rather old and satanic, even proclaiming allegiance to Lucifer. He is, tying emergence and New Ageism together, although, he tries to be subtle about it. A New Ageism is a nod in this direction as we mature intellectually and scientifically. See, if you're smart, and you think science, is good, then you're gonna cleave to emergence, in his opinion. We'll realize that the traditional religions are holding us back. We'll achieve our liberation by relying less on the structures of religions and moving into the promising horizon of spirituality. That's what he's saying. That's the modern analysis of how things will progress. I think that's what he's saying. I just wanted to stop that word liberation there. We'll achieve our liberation by relying less on the structures and religions of religions and moving into the promising horizon of spirituality. I encourage you to get the book because you're obviously not getting it. Good for me. I keep interjecting. I'm sure it's hard to understand for anyone to keep up with what actually I'm reading, maybe, perhaps. And I don't mean that to be intentional. It's just that, I'm trying to help people see the sophistry and the deception here. Because what's happening here is he's making a critique. He's pretending to critique in what he's just stated in a few paragraphs here of, a view of how things were going to develop into the 21st century, basically. But, what's interesting about that, so he superficially pretends to critique this, but yet what he proposes embraces it, embraces this view, which is, again, much subtlety, much double talk, really. Okay, so continuing to read again here, very bottom of page number 2. This was, of course, a natural consequence of God's death, first declared by Friedrich Nietzsche in 1882 and touted again by Time magazine in 1966. Nietzsche himself wasn't out to kill God per se, nor was he saying that no one believed in God anymore. He was announcing that the modern mind could no longer tolerate an authoritarian figure who towers over the cosmos with a lightning bolt in his hand, ready to strike down evildoers. That deity, he said, had been murdered. With the death of that version of God, the Christian morals that upheld all of Western society had been undermined. We were, Nietzsche feared, on a fast track to nihilistic hell. So he went on a search for some sort of universal moral foundation that was not dependent upon an unacceptable and medieval notion of God. I'm not going to argue with what he just said about Nietzsche. The interesting thing about materialist philosophers, ones who come out of a Christian background, or in this case, and Nietzsche sort of come out of that background, although I believe, if I remember correctly, he was Jewish. Um, they basically are rather double-minded, and you can, for instance, this other study I'm doing with Stephen Hicks' book, Explaining Postmodernism. I first became introduced to Stephen Hicks through a documentary he produced called Nietzsche and the Nazis. And Hicks, being an objectivist, is somewhat, um, forgive me, Dr. Hicks, being beholden to Nietzsche because some of the philosophy, well, the philosophy of objectivism kind of flows out of um, Nietzsche's conceptions of willpower, and human potential. His documentary was about how Nazism abused Nietzschean philosophy, the will to power concept, and how it was blended with a version of Christianity, rather heretical version of Christianity promoted in Nazi propaganda using Christian symbols, to make the Nazis out to be some realization of a millennial reign, uh, of the German people as being, some people of God, basically. Um, I probably did a poor job of explaining that. But anyway, so, what's interesting about Nietzsche and these other fellows, including Marx, is, I remember reading the Communist Manifesto, and depending on which side you wanted to be on, the way things were being laid out, you could identify with the bourgeoisie, you could identify with the proletariat. Uh, and so you were being challenged to decide which side you're going to be on. With Marx, he was hell bent on convincing you that the bourgeoisie were the evil ones, and you're going to want to be on the side of the proletariat. You know, uh, I've not read it nearly enough Nietzsche to know what. Well, so Nietzsche kind of could sort of straddle the fence with some people. Here, Tony Jones wants to place him on the side of godliness, basically. Because he's kind of apologizing for Nietzsche here. It wasn't just God is dead, it's that, faith is changing. The new spirituality is required. And in Nietzsche, basically, the new spirituality is man is God. Or if he's going to be godly, he's going to have to change his ways and become, uh, you know, uh, a moralistic totalitarian, basically. Um, Again, I'm sure Nietzsche experts would want to grill me, over what I've just said. I encourage you to study these things for yourselves. So picking up here, let's see. We were, Nietzsche feared, on a fast track to nihilistic hell. So he went on a search for some sort of universal moral foundation that was not dependent on unacceptable and medieval notion of God. Um, so Jones is defending Nietzsche, and he's using Nietzsche as a springboard to try to pitch the emergent church. That same sensibility was seen by many observers as a move toward a universal, in parentheses, and secular spirituality. We would realize how much we had in common. We would become more enlightened. We would teach the world to sing in perfect harmony. Reference to pop culture. But a funny thing happened on the way to the 21st century. We became more religious, not less. Fundamentalisms now thrive in all major religions. Churches and religious schools keep popping up, and religious books outsell all other categories. Never mind, that's sort of a jab, at um, Christian publishing, and I think Christian publishing deserves a lot of criticism. But these guys publish a lot of books, uh, you know. So it seems kind of hypocritical to criticize selling books when you intend to sell a lot of them. Nowadays, you can't find a self-respecting social theorist proclaiming secularism. Instead, you're they're studying religion and getting FaceTime on CNN. Again, Tony said a fair amount of FaceTime, explaining too often oblivious journalists how religious Americans really are. Back in the pulpits, ironically, pastors continue to bewail that we're living through a decline and fall of Judeo-Christian American empire, that secularism is a fast-moving glacier, proposing to scrape the landscape clean. He didn't say that, but I'll just kind of contextualize that. Raising the mountains of faith that have been part of America since birth. Um, this goes on and on. Yeah, again, he uses many words to try to make a point. Basically, he is trying to present. He's trying to establish what he would propose are two extremes and put himself squarely in the middle. Put the emergent church in the middle, basically. So it's the third way, which is very, very communist. Uh, uh, not, I shouldn't say communist, but Fabian socialist um, proposition. In other words, um, it's very Hegelian, um, presenting two extremes and saying we need to take the middle road. Well, I feel like I'm really dragging this down, but he has we're in this chapter, leaving the old country, chapter number 1, and then he's coming right into a new section, church is dead. And so again, he's saying, well, God isn't dead, but church is dead. We need a new church. That's what he's saying. In the 21st century, it's not God who's dead, it's the church. What did I just tell you? Or at least conventional forms of church. So Tony wants to pull you into the emergent church where they sit around candlelit rooms in comfy chairs, deconstructing the Bible, tearing down, trying to show you where it's mostly rhetoric and it's deceptive language, and that there's all kinds of sexism built into it, and racism, and um, just all the worst characteristics of humanity in it, and therefore you'll be more enlightened and you will feel confident that we need a new faith. We need to construct something better. And And Tony Jones and his fellows, Brian McLaren and others, would love to show you how to build it, build the new church. Similarly, the modern church is changing and evolving and emerging. Now, again, this is kind of pointless. I would like to show you just how unorthodox Emergence is. All right, he has in trying to tell his own story, he has a chapter here, chapter 4, the theology stupid, where he's trying to promote new theology. The old ones failed, we need a new one. And he's telling his own story of being a disgruntled church worker, reaching point of breakdown, and he was working for Campus Crusade for Christ, I guess. But let me, let's see. All right. And so he's talking about, on page 97, he's talking about what Campus Crusade was all about, which was using, from his account, and I'm not going to try to argue with it. I don't have any knowledge of Campus Crusade for Christ, but evangelicalism at a certain point became very worldly, which was the antithesis of what evangelicalism was supposed to be. There's been this notion in churches that we can Christianize anything. We can use whatever, practically whatever, even to the point where maybe they're not so popular now, but there's been something called the Triple X Church that proposes to go into the subculture of pornography and what have you, the pornography industry, and witness, for God. But what's interesting is it seems to be equally about pornifying Christian theology. In other words, it's a move towards what Emergence refer to as contextualization. The Bible isn't good enough, so what they need to do is put it in language that other people understand, supposedly. But that means really it's a license for them to abandon the Bible, really, to try to I guess I shouldn't struggle so hard for a word. The Jews in Babylon had the Targum. They were basically commentaries on the Old Testament, because that's what the Jews had for the Bible. And even the book of Nehemiah, really underscores the importance of having men who studied the Bible being prepared to explain the Word of God to people, to the average person. Nothing wrong with that. I'm not going to complain about that at all. But unfortunately, that the principle has been abused to the extent that basically it becomes more often this idea of contextualization, putting the Bible in context becomes actually more of an excuse for abandoning the Bible and folding in leaven into scriptural doctrine. And this is very much what I think has occurred because he talks about consumerist Bernaysian, referring to Edward Bernays, a nephew of Sigmund Freud, who developed science, quote unquote, of public relations, using psychological techniques to manipulate. Um, Basically, he's talking about, and I think rightly so, criticizing ministries for using techniques to try to preach the gospel where they weren't really preaching the gospel, and that's one of his major complaints, and I don't blame him for that. But what's interesting is he complains about it, but yet basically he demonstrates his own unbelief in here. And I want to get to this point because I'm taking more time than I wanted to. But he says, I was in college in the late 1980s. So he was talking about a slogan they had, Campus Crusade, saying 1 billion new Christians by 2000, year 2000. So, again, these slogans, these marketing techniques that they adopted, thinking they could, you know, promote Christ, like some product. I was in college in the 1980s, so the millennium was breathing down our necks. 1 billion new Christians by 2000 was the oft trumpeted refrain. Of course, there are over 2 billion Christians in the world, but since half of those, Roman Catholics, aren't considered saved by crusaders, referring to Campus Crusade, Protestant ministry, and lots of others, the Orthodox and the mainline Protestants were probably not really believers. I want to say some things about what I think is a proper context for denominational splitting, congregation splitting, but I need to avoid that. That's just out of the scope here. But, that's what he's complaining about. There were actually far fewer than 1 billion of us in the world. Us, quote unquote. He has it in quotes. The rapidity with which the Crusaders, the rabid Crusaders, pursued evangelism was not the result of a desire to expand the commercial Christian empire, as one might suspect. And he has in parenthesis, Bill Bright, the founder of Crusade, was by all accounts a financially modest individual. He's again, he's criticizing, consumerism in the church, capitalism. It was instead the result of this theological axiom: when everyone on the planet has heard the salvation message, Jesus will return. Um, that's not biblical. You can't set a date. You can't set a time. That's biblical. And, saying you know not when, and we're to occupy. Not like where we currently have stooges out in the public squares occupying parks, uh, pooping on police cars, uh, committing crimes, and lobbying for more Marxism and big government. No, we're to occupy, um, fulfilling the Great Commission, teaching, baptizing. Uh, so he said that's the proposition that Campus Crusade, more or less, is kind of founded on. I don't know, maybe so, but yeah, that is seems to be a very popular, quote unquote, evangelical pillar that were to somehow help God bring in the kingdom by converting people. Well, I think that's a bit flawed. And that's not a solid axiom. So I have to agree with Jones on that. This belief comes primarily from a verse in the 24th chapter of Matthew's Gospel. There, Jesus is recorded as giving a fairly horrifying account of the end of the. Now, this is the main reason why I'm going into this part, and then I'm going to break off from his text here and just put it aside and say, buy the book, read it yourself if you want to know whether or not I've been honest in my evaluation here. This belief comes primarily from a verse in the 24th chapter of Matthew's Gospel. There, Jesus is recording as giving a fairly horrifying account of the end of the age. Wars, famine, earthquakes, persecution, false messiahs, and love grown cold. He puts that in quotes. Amid this chapter-long harangue, Jesus says, "And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end shall come." Okay, that is a very important point to nail down, because he's going to use this as a pivot. This idea, this exhortation, or this statement that Jesus made. Okay, so that's the end of a paragraph. Next paragraph. Like many things, here it comes, as Tony Jones' statement of faith in this matter. Like many things in the Bible, it seems simple at first. If A, then B. A syllogism is what he's talking about. Syllogism. Well, he doesn't quite develop the syllogism here. He's going to develop it for us, but if A, then B proposition. Okay. If we preach the gospel to the whole world, then the end of the age will come. But a little reflection, a little more thinking with your postmodern addled mind reveals more complexity. First of all, the exact nature of the gospel of the kingdom is a source of much debate among Christians. So he calls that into question. What is the gospel of the kingdom? And while some relate to it forensically, or relate it forensically to the atonement, which is hard to imagine since Jesus says these things before he was executed. Let me back up. I goofed that up. I'm not polished. I'm not, I'm not likely to find my way in a public meeting and get paid for this, and which is fine. That's not my goal. Okay, let me pick that up again. But a little reflection reveals more complexity. First of all, the exact nature of the gospel of the kingdom is a source of much debate among Christians. While some relate it forensically to the atonement, which is hard, which he says in parentheses, which is hard to imagine since Jesus says these things before he was executed. And he's not finished the sentence here. Maybe I should finish it. Others consider it closer to Jesus' proclamation of the year of the Lord's, he puts this in quote, the year of the Lord's favor in Luke chapter 4. Harking back to the Israelite custom of releasing all slaves. Okay, it's Jubilee, I think it is. Releasing all slaves and forgiving all debts every 50 years. Okay, so that's the end of the paragraph. So he's saying there's two interpretations, gospel of the kingdom. One relates it directly to the atonement, and he's saying that the other relates it to a work. That work being releasing slaves, which he's going to develop here later on, and I'm not going to go through it all, but he's going to develop that as an act of reconciliation. It's a work of reconciliation that the Jews were given. A work, a jubilee was every um, 49 years, 50 years, 50th year, that there would be an amnesty for slaves and and debtors. Okay, so those are the two things. Gospel kingdom, it's either the having to do with the atonement, or it's having to do with jubilee. But that parenthetic part where he's trying to dismiss the interpretation, which ties gospel of the kingdom to Christ's death on the cross and his resurrection, uh, which is hard, he says, which is hard to imagine that Jesus saying this thing would be speaking of his death, because he said it before his death. In other words, Tony Jones's Jesus is not God. He doesn't know anything than a normal man would know. In other words, he doesn't know the future. All right. That's what that says right there. You have to, and he says it. He's not. I don't have to deconstruct Tony Jones. He says these things. He puts this in parentheses, and all you have to do is read. That's the thing. God gave you a language processor. Read. Okay, now I'm going to wrap this. I'm skipping a little bit here. It's not pertinent. He's making the argument. He's trying to use some. Well, maybe I should. I'll finish this paragraph up. I'm sorry. Um, okay. So after he just made this assertion that you can tie it to the Jubilee, he says, further, this passage is not a conditional in the Greek. So he's appealing to some scholarly knowledge of the Greek language, which you probably don't have, so you should take Tony's word for it. That is, in Greek, it is not constructed as an if-then statement. Instead, the verb preach is in future passive tense, which will be preached or will have been preached. And the verb come is in the future tense, will come. Although the original Greek lacks punctuation, we might punctuate it thusly. And this, so he's going to reinvent revision, which I would hope that you may associate with the term revise. He's going to revision this verse for you. So here we go. Here's his revision. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and the end will come. That's the full quote. Okay. And in other words, these two things will happen, but the latter is not necessarily contingent on the former. And to add to the complexity, we don't know exactly how Jesus said it in his own language, Aramaic. So he's calling interpretations into doubt. It's very subtle. But here's the thing I want to get to, and I'm just gonna break off with Tony Jones at this point. So there's another paragraph here. I've highlighted some stuff, and again, he's trying to deconstruct this notion that it has anything to do with atonement, because Jesus couldn't have said something that referred to future events, because he it's hard to imagine that he would know, Okay, and why? How can I make that charge? How can I charge Tony Jones with being, um, one who doesn't believe in the deity of Christ? Well, he says it pretty more straightforwardly right here. After another chapter or another paragraph, he says, and finally, still talking on this subject, um, the gospel of the kingdom being preached to the world, he says, and finally, quote unquote, the world to which the gospel would be preached was not the planet Earth. The only quote unquote world known to Jesus was the Roman Empire and its peripheral trading partners. Large to be sure, but not nearly the scope of our world today. What he's saying right there is Jesus didn't know anything beyond what the normal educated man might know about the world of his day. He's not God. He's entirely mortal. He's a good teacher. Maybe he's the hippie teacher of, that's presented in the Aquarian Gospel of Jesus Christ, who blends in theosophy with, his Christian teaching. Oh, this stuff wears me out. So that I'm gonna, 46 minutes. That took much longer. I can't sit here and impassionately read this stuff, and then impassionately make an appeal, to reason. I just can't do it. I guess that's a character flaw on my part. But this is the Emergent Church, and I have books on theosophy, and maybe I'll refer to this every once in a while, discussing how um, theosophy back in the early part of the 20th century was presenting the same theology as the Emergent Church. Just briefly, I'd like to refer to some upcoming study that I want to do as kind of a continuation along this theme. Basically, I've made this charge that the Emergent Church is the fruit of maybe I haven't stated it clearly enough, but the Emergent Church, in my opinion, is the fruit of unbelieving congregations and leaders, in Protestant Christian institutions. And I say that because I've studied the issue. I'm by no means any kind of authority on it. I've had to rely on some people that I feel have made a scholarly analysis of it. And part of that, one of the probably the most popular uh, ministries, institutions, if you will, um, in evangelicalism is the Billy Graham organization, and including their association with Wheaton College. I mean, that is sort of the heart of evangelicalism. Yeah, and it's supposed to be, a organization that just about everybody can rally around, willing to support Protestantism as a certainly in the Orthodox Protestantism, as a ministry that one can respect. That a lot of people just have a good opinion of Billy Graham. I did for a long time, also, until I found out that what his what Charles Finney, his mentor in evangelicalism, posthumous mentor, what he believed. Um, Charles Finney wrote a book, Finney's Theology. So, we don't have to speculate. He lays it all out. And basically, he didn't believe in original sin. And Finney was the father of the altar call, basically, thinking that you could just go around the country, preach a gospel message, and then you call people down to the altar, to make a show of repentance and become Christian. And that these were considered revivals. And of course, Billy Graham, he would be credited by many well-meaning people for being one that converted, millions to Christianity. I'm becoming congested here. I don't, I don't know why, but I wasn't when I started this thing. Anyhow, I've known for some time that back in the 70s, the Billy Graham organization began a partnership with people outside the church trying to establish an agenda for evangelicals back in the late 70s, and which is interesting. I think it shows the root of the emergent church, because those people back in the 70s who were leaders in evangelicalism were essentially the fathers, the parents of people who are establishing the heretical emergent church. And if one is willing to consider how Finneyism promotes to grow church congregations through professions of faith contrary to biblical doctrine, the Bible doesn't teach that you merely make a decision for Christ and you're Christian. It doesn't teach that. There's much more involved. And I'm not saying that you can't make a decision. I very much came to Christ through deciding to start studying the Bible. There was a point of crisis in my life. I realized that everything I believed in seemed destitute, and that it wasn't my only part in the crisis was that I had come to the conclusion that if the crisis developed into a bad outcome for another person, that my life wasn't going to be worth living. So that was my crisis. It was not personal harm or devastation in my life, other than the aspect of losing a reason for living that brought me to Christ. So I'm not by any means trying to say that one can't decide to quit running away from God. No. But one doesn't merely decide to do that and then basically biblical faith, and maybe I should try to prove this biblically, but we're exhorted to examine ourselves. We're exhorted to believe. Yeah, I'll have to save that for another time to really fully develop that. Um, I would hope that people that might watch this video are students of the Bible. They've been privileged to be taught by men who believe the Bible and have engaged it, have tested it, that they understand that none seeketh after God, no, not one, uh, as Paul says. So you don't come to God. As a matter of fact, Paul says in Romans that faith is a gift. I did nothing to deserve Christ or salvation. It's not something um, that I could claim that I've done for myself, especially through a decision. Anyhow, all my rambling doesn't seem like I should take a full hour to ramble like this and to go on and on, but this is serious business as far as I'm concerned. And anyway, so I have these books. They're sources now that I've known about for some time. I had them on my Amazon wish list. I finally decided, if I'm going to make a charge and put forth an argument, I can't rely on somebody else's research entirely. I need to get the sources they've named so that I can, with all confidence, say this is it. They found the documentation has been interpreted correctly. It's there, it's real. So this isn't just somebody else's unsubstantiated charge. That the Billy Graham organization went into consultations with pagan uh, people and organizations to construct a plan for the future. They did this back in the 70s. This book here, written by Donald E. Hoke, or maybe it's Hokey. I shouldn't do that. Shouldn't make fun of the man's name. This man was a person in the Billy Graham organization, or at least affiliated with it. And he brought the attention of the Billy Graham organization to these gloom and doom predictions about the future. And basically, they proposed to study this developing movement, which now we can say is basically embodied in the green movement in the United States and in the rest of the world, the environmentalist movement. And it's pretty well documented in this book. This was the first book in a series published in 1977. Can't see. Oh, trouble is, where the did a bad job of that. Anyway, evangelicals face the future, scenarios, addresses, and responses from the consultation on future evangelical concerns held in Atlanta, Georgia, December 14th through 17th, 1977. They had this conference. Group of evangelicals got together. They started studying these gloom and doom predictions that were cast back in the late 70s. And their proposal was, well, as to respond to this, we need to cast our own vision. This gloom and doom stuff, um, maybe I should specify what the gloom and doom stuff was. It was a series of reports as spelled out in these books. This other book here was published in 79. And what's interesting, notice the subtitle, An Evangelical Agenda, 1984 and Beyond. What's interesting about this is actually, this is sort of Orwellian. And he actually quotes Orwell in here in talking about a dystopian future, and how basically it was incumbent upon evangelicalism to help bring in the kingdom by providing an alternative to a dystopian future. But what's interesting is actually, I think the case can be made for evangelicalism helping to promote a dystopian future if one comes about. And this is a matter of basically manufacturing crisis, or embracing a manufacturing crisis in order to do that which you couldn't otherwise do. And I don't think that every pastor or doctor of ministry that was involved in this thing had really, sinister intentions. But I think there were participants in it that did. And I would have thought that Bible-believing Christians would have fallen for this hokum. And basically, it opened doors for theosophy to come in and become rooted in churches. Many of the folks these people consulted with, they were outside the church, were theosophists. So that, in my assessment, is what this embracing Finneyism theology, which runs contrary to the Bible, preaching that original sin didn't exist, that men can choose to be saved and make a decision, and really not respecting what the Bible says about faith being a gift, and that one is born not of flesh but of the Spirit. If one is to be born, reborn as a child of God, and again, getting their agenda for the future, having it formed and shaped by theosophists, Luciferians. Well, I'm going to have to split this video up. I'm running to an hour here, and I'll probably have to redo some of it, because I do this in a haphazard manner. I don't mean to. I get worked up. These words mean something. It's important, and I'm not polished by any means. I'm as rough as they come, but. No, it's not the time for business as usual, as far as I'm concerned. I'm not wanting to encourage people to become unhinged and panic or give up. On the other hand, let's come to our senses on some of this stuff. start thinking, and disavow this notion that all is synthesis, that we can construct a corral pitting opposites against one another and saying, let's take the middle way. That's the way forward. Because very often it's that method is used to herd sheeple. Evangelicals being people who supposedly believed God and had the logos, upheld the Bible as a worthy authority, should have never fallen for this globalist propaganda that was presented. They Hoke apparently. Let me just read this real quick. Trying to remember. I was reading these books the other evening when I first got it. Basically, he tells a story real quick. My introduction to futurism. This is his kind of a foreword to the book, entitled "Views of the Future as Reflected in the Reports to the Club of Rome," which was a think tank in Europe. My introduction to the futurism took place at the president's course of the American Management Association in October 1965. To use a popular younger person's phrase, my mind was blown. In a presentation by Michael Cammey, director of the long-range planning for the Xerox Corporation, on the implications of exponential growth in populations, science, knowledge, history, and other fields. These ideas slowly fermented in my mind. My next, just really congested here. My next, more shockingly serious insight into futurism came with the reading of the first report to the Club of Rome entitled "The Limits to Growth," published in 1972. Born in April 1968 with an international group of 30 scientists, educators, economists, humanists, industrialists, and civil servants gathered in Rome at the invitation of Dr. Aurelio Pesci, a foresighted Italian economist. The Club of Rome now numbers some 70 persons from 25 nations in its restricted elite membership. None are politicians, nor does the group seek to express any single ideological, political, or national point of view. Basically, that's a beautiful summary right there. This man is a church leader saying, he was involved in government, and his mind was blown by what secularists were saying. And what's interesting about that is, well, maybe I shouldn't be so hard on him, is, I have the benefit of hindsight to see where a lot of the propaganda that was presented back in the 70s about, global doom has just not materialized. This is 2011, the latter part of 2011, I'm making this video in. This guy, was had this epiphany, he claims, in the 1970s. So there's 40 years right there, basically. I have 40 years to look back on and And I can say, well, a lot of this was hokum. But Mr. Hoke fell for it, and so did leaders in the Billy Graham organization, and they decided rather than use the Bible as the guide, there's actually talk about a certain amount of universalism in here, and a new theology. And they had theosophists coming in and lecturing to them, and then they would respond to these people. And the response was sort of kind of a rejection of what these guys said, but it was also a leavening, allowing this doctrine, secular Luciferian doctrine, to be folded into a plan for the future by evangelicals. So I think maybe it'll be worth studying this. I'll try to rein in my enthusiasm and my critical, hostile attitude. But yeah, maybe I'm not the right person to do this. But what have churches been teaching people? What have American Christians been spending their time on? I don't mind saying that I've been deceived in the past, and my hope and prayer is by the grace of God I will not be deceived in the future. And I don't intend to take my marching orders, from churches that aren't doing the work of God, preaching and teaching from the Holy Bible. That's not to say to be ignorant of science. I have a bachelor's degree in geology. I studied science. Yes, at one time I was a faithful Darwinist, faithful materialist, rejected religion entirely, even though didn't have the courage to admit I rejected it entirely. I considered myself agnostic because I wanted to kind of be able to sit on the fence. But I was an enemy of God, and I've come to my senses. Darwinism, in my mind, even though Darwinist language, has permeated science almost entirely. It has failed to prove the origins of life, and that really is essential. It proposed to do so, at least in my lifetime, if not from the beginning. It proposed to do so, and it has demonstrated itself to be bankrupt in that regard. When Darwinists start talking seriously, promoting the idea, of their what they call panspermia, or what I like to call the alien seed theory, where some ET must have put life on the Earth, that speaks volumes. That ought to tell people that that scientists that science has more or less reached the conclusion, or at least the popular pimps of scientism have reached the conclusion that they're not going to be able to demonstrate the origin of life. So they don't have the answer. And anyway, I shouldn't go into that. I spent way too much time, an hour and 13 minutes. I'll try to redeem this. Maybe I'll have to edit it quite a bit. But yeah, that's why I'm not a secularist materialist. That's part of why I was willing to go to my death holding on to secularism and scientism, Darwinism. But through the grace of God, I was brought to my knees. And I'm grateful for his faithfulness and teaching me. Giving me a new logos, one that is founded on reason, facts, logic, The Bible isn't all, it isn't mysticism, it isn't, there's parts in it that speak to, our limited ability to perceive, but that's not to say that it promotes mysticism at all, really. And yes, we are exhorted to have faith and believe, but that doesn't mean that the Bible doesn't lay claims to history and to the cosmos. It makes claims on the history and cosmos and challenges us to evaluate those claims. It's beautifully stated in the epistles. Taste of God and see if he is good. And that's a kind of a statement about try. God challenges us to try the things that are delivered to us as revelation. and to judge for ourselves as to how solid they are. And I find them to be very solid. I'm not oblivious to the arguments made against Christianity. I put my faith in them for years, but no more. I did believe wholeheartedly and unreservedly overnight. I've grown in my faith through the grace of God. God, I've grown, and I hope to continue to grow in it. I hope Americans in the church wake up, stop messing around, and stop worshiping secularism, and hopefully not falling for um, these philosophies that present themselves as sheep, uh, angels of light, if you will, rather than wolves in sheep clothing. But um, generally, what's presented by Tony Jones and some of these other fellows as enlightenment is endarkenment. It's not designed to enlighten. It's designed to mystify. And for what purpose? That's the question. See you later.